I will die in this war. That is how this story ends. That is how every story ends for the men and women of Krieg. That is the story that we long for, to pay for our sins with the destruction of our flesh. So far, I have been denied the Emperor's mercy and forgiveness. After 10 years, I still march. I have received so many wounds, I have ceased counting. I have so many bionics that if you removed my mask and my coat, you might see more metal than man. But my heart still beats, and I still fight. We march now, and I still carry her flower. It is wilted and dry, but it still sits in my breast pocket. I do not know why I keep it. The land is dead around us. Bloating corpses of livestock litter the abandoned pastures. If dead grass and mud could be called a pasture. We found bodies left, strung up on many dead, leafless trees with profane runes carved into their flesh. The bodies and limbs were so mutilated until I could barely tell that they had once been human. Flame-up platoons disposed of the desecrated corpses, and any other dead flesh they could find. No further dignity would be allowed for these unfortunate wretches. The rest of us simply marched ahead through these dead lands, peopled by only the dead and burnt-out husks of homes that still smoldered with thick black smoke. We marched for a week, with only a few scattered skirmishes. There was no real contact with the enemy, just small, roaming bands of looting, murderous scum. We dealt with them swiftly and mercilessly. Our scouts reported no sign of any significant enemy force. We had been expecting to meet them by now. Their army was reported to be advancing in this sector, but there was nothing. I smelled a trap, but I said nothing to my commander. I knew he was no fool, and he had the same soldier instincts as I. Still, we pressed forward towards the heretic stronghold. We did not slow our advance, though we did place minesweepers in front of our columns, and we doubled our watches. A few more days and we could see the outer walls of the heavily fortified city. Trenches and gun emplacements encircled the city and bristled with firepower. Why? Why play into our hands? Why would anyone choose to fight a siege battle against the death corps of Krieg? But we dug our trenches. Our tanks and artillery shelled the city. We knew our craft. We knew how to grind down the opposition. We had them completely encircled, shelled them day and night, while drawing the noose tighter and tighter. Dig the trenches a little closer. Dig the trenches a little closer. There was no need for a frontal assault. We were well supplied, and their army was isolated. Wait until they are low on food. Wait until they break. On the third day, we could hear hellish chanting coming from the city, as thick black clouds rolled in. We could hear the unnatural sound, even over the tumult of our own relentless guns. By nightfall, the sky filled with bolts of crimson lightning, but no thunders followed. The chanting grew louder and more frantic as the sky looked as if it was being shattered. Suddenly we saw enemies in the trenches stirring. They began moving erratically as several screeched and went over the top, firing their weapons wildly at our positions. I had my las gun ready. They were gunned down mercilessly. Something seemed to possess the rebels as more of them screeched beneath the hideous red light of the soundless bolts. Suddenly they all lurched out of their trenches in a furious massed charge. They moved like puppets on strings, jerking this way and that as they moved. Spittle and blood flew from their mouths as they fired heedlessly, trampling any of their comrades who fell into a bloody pulp beneath their boots. It was a massacre, and it simply did not stop. Massed las fire and bolt fire tore into their lines. Their blood ran in rivers and stained the earth red. Limbs and viscera were everywhere. The more they died, the more they almost gleefully threw themselves into our fire. Our rate of fire was constant, with only brief pauses to reload a new battery pack. As thousands poured forth from the enemy side, no man's land quickly became a muddy morass. The sheer amount of blood and pounding boots was enough to tear the land asunder. What was happening? Why do they do this? There were no vehicles or walkers to support this charge. As more and more died, the lightning storm intensified, until the land below was consistently illuminated by the hateful crimson light. Only a few manage to throw grenades. Some fall short. One hits a machine gun nest. Others are shot before they can throw their explosives and send shrapnel into their own lines. Despite staggering losses, the madmen manage to reach our first trench. They attack with reckless abandon, as my bayonet thrusts again and again and again. Our back ranks are elevated, so they continue to pour fire into the screeching maniacs, and the blood still pours. The mire of blood and bodies shines in the light of the sky, unnaturally. It hurts my eyes to look at it. As we kill the ones that reach the trench, the flamers come to the front and pour promethium across the battlefield, incinerating scores of them. Somehow flaming bodies still manage to fling themselves at us, driven by the will of their dark masters to kill. Beyond the flames, the pools of blood seem to shimmer and warp like a mirage in the desert sun. The shrieks that rose from the city grew to an impossible level, drowning out the thunderous din of battle. As I watched this scene of blood and carnage play out, as I had seen countless times before, I came to a realization that filled me with dread that a man of Krieg is not accustomed to. This was not a battle. This was a sacrifice. The mirage effect grew stronger across the battlefield as shapes before my eyes writhed and twisted. Roiling energies stirred across all of no man's land as the silent lightning suddenly ceased. The battlefield was plunged into darkness, lit only by the flash of weapon fire, and the eerie glow that twisted reality in the field of blood. A wail ripped across the battlefield as lightning resumed, striking all across the undulating, pulsing landscape of no man's land. Arcs of energy lashed out from the hellish pit and raked our lines, incinerating every man they touched. Before I could move, this hideous sorcery struck my trench, and in a moment 6 men were reduced to piles of ash, my commander among them. Being the highest ranking, most senior soldier in the company, I assumed command. The rebels continued to run forward. Many were incinerated by the witch energies. Those that reached the edge of the roiling pools simply fell out of sight. In one terrible moment, I saw things moving beneath the pools. I saw things writhing, limbs and claws and teeth and undulating appendages. They moved in impossible ways, shaped in impossible proportions, and they moved in a way that no man or beast ever could. Suddenly these monstrous things of unreality burst through the blood and gore with piercing, hellish screams. The things came forth. They were hideous parodies of life, contorted spines, grasping human-like limbs, screaming faces and eyes over every inch of their bodies as gore and viscera dripped from their many limbs and maws. We did not hesitate. We fired upon the blasphemous things. It was impossible to hear anything, so I signaled for my men to tactically withdraw back further into our network of trenches, keeping a disciplined stream of fire on our enemies. We would allow them to advance, using the trenches to slow down and create bottlenecks where we could focus our fire. These things were impossibly fast. They were among us in the blink of an eye, slashing, biting, and clawing their way through our ranks. Las burns scorched their bodies, and bolter rounds tore bloody chunks from their flesh. But these things felt no pain and pressed forward. More poured out of the pit as we continued our disciplined retreat. A few of the things collapsed in heaps of gore, finally felled by relentless volleys. But more came. More and more Kriegsmen paid their debt they owed the Emperor that day. I remember little of what happened next. The scuttling abominations began to overwhelm the lines, scything through my comrades and gorging themselves on flesh. I do not remember the pain of my wounds, nor when my bionic arm was torn from me. I do not remember when the thing pierced my chest and destroyed my lung. I remember feeling a sense of relief that my duty had been fulfilled, and soon I would have that impossible forgiveness that every son and daughter of Krieg longs for. With one arm remaining, and pinned the way I was, I knew I could not reach for my last grenade. I might have smiled as I reached into my breast pocket and pulled forth a flower. If my lungs were whole, I might have laughed. The wilted blossom was stained bright red with my blood, and its wilted petals almost seemed alive again. The creature seemed to flinch away from me for a moment, and then I saw her face, bright and gleaming like the sun. I saw their youthful smiles, their eyes full of hope. Oh. So, this was death. An unexpected, pleasant welcome to oblivion. I was told later what had happened. Men reported flashes of golden light around the city. Shortly afterwards, the horrid chanting stopped. The baleful energies that kept these twisted things in this place vanished, and their ties to this world were severed. The official story is there was some kind of attack by our Mechanicus allies that disabled the blasphemous engine that spawned this portal. The city fell 2 days later. My men told me they saw a golden light flash between me and the creature before the thing was sent screaming back to the pit that spawned it. One man told me he thought he saw the shape of a woman stand over me. Just for a moment. My body is broken. But my experience and my command performance during that blasphemous night has convinced them that I am valuable enough to keep alive. I will be repaired. I will fight again. I will die in this war. That is how this story ends. That is how every story ends for the men and women of Krieg. That is the story that we long for, to pay for our sins with the destruction of our flesh. So far, I have been denied the Emperor's mercy and forgiveness. But, perhaps, there is more to be won than my own salvation, or even the salvation of Krieg. Perhaps there is something more my Emperor wishes me to understand.